My name is Sydney, and I'm 30 years old. I was sitting in the quiet of our apartment, watching my boyfriend pack an overnight bag like it was nothing, like he wasn't folding a knife into the middle of our life and calling it a weekend. He moved calmly, practiced, like he'd rehearsed this, like he'd already decided how the conversation would go, and my role in it was to either smile or be labeled the problem. We had been together for 3 years, living together for 1. We had a 2-bedroom apartment in Riverside, split rent down the middle, and adopted a cat named Biscuit who acted like he owned the place and we were just paying his bills. For most of those 3 years, people called us steady, the kind of couple who didn't post dramatic captions, didn't break up every other month, didn't need an audience. I used to think that was love. Now I realize it was just me doing all the stabilizing while he decided how much chaos he wanted to flirt with. His name was Jason. He was 28. He had this way of turning his charm on and off depending on who was watching. With strangers, he was warm, attentive, the kind of man who held doors and asked follow-up questions. With me lately, he had been efficient, not cruel in obvious ways, not loud, just distant in a way that made you feel silly for noticing, like you were begging for crumbs when you should have been sitting at the table. The shift started last fall when he switched departments at work. New team, new projects, new people, and suddenly he came home buzzing the way he used to buzz when we first started dating, like life was exciting again. I remember smiling at first because I wanted him to be happy. I wanted him to feel fulfilled. But happiness didn't look like fulfillment. It looked like distraction. It looked like his phone lighting up in the middle of our movie nights, his thumb moving fast, his eyes bright in a way they hadn't been for me in months. Her name started showing up in the second week, Mara. At first it was harmless. Mara suggested this approach for the campaign. Mara made everyone laugh during the meeting. Mara brought donuts. He said her name like it was casual, like she was just background noise, and maybe she was, at first. But then the texting began. Evening text during our dinner. Morning text before he even brushed his teeth. Lunch hour text that made him smile at his phone instead of smiling at me across the table. He started taking his phone with him everywhere, even to the bathroom, even to the shower where it sat on the counter, like it needed to breathe the steam with him. When I'd walk into a room, he'd tilt the screen down just slightly, not enough to look guilty, just enough to make my stomach drop. I tried to bring it up once, carefully. The way you do when you already know the person you love is going to treat your concern like an accusation. You've been talking to her a lot, I said one night, trying to keep my voice light. He didn't even look up from his phone. She's a coworker, Sid. We're working on a campaign. It's collaborative. And then he added the word that always ended the conversation, insecure. That word is a weapon because it doesn't answer anything. It doesn't explain the late texts. It doesn't explain the way he started dressing better on days he said Mara would be in the office. It doesn't explain why he laughed at her messages with a different laugh than the one he used with me. But the word does one thing really well. It makes you feel embarrassed for having eyes. 6 months ago, I would have apologized. 6 months ago, I would have convinced myself I was overthinking. I would have swallowed it, because I didn't want to be the kind of girlfriend who caused problems. But lately, patterns had been stacking up like evidence, and I was tired of being told my instincts were a flaw. Jason started going to after-work drinks with the team. He would come home at 10, sometimes 11, smelling like beer and somebody else's perfume clinging to the fabric of his jacket in a way that made me want to wash my hands just from touching it. When I asked how it went, he would give vague answers, the usual crowd, just work stuff. But when I asked if Mara was there, he would pause for half a second too long, like he needed to remember which lie he was committed to. Then he'd say yes, like it was no big deal, like my question was the big deal. The weekend trip announcement came on a Tuesday night. I was cooking dinner. He was scrolling his phone, grinning like he had been handed something he didn't have to earn. "Hey, so there's this lake resort thing. Group from work," he said. "I'm thinking of going." His tone was casual, like he was telling me he might pick up milk. I set down the spatula slowly. "When? This weekend, Friday to Sunday. Who's going?" He shrugged. "Just some people." I waited. He kept his eyes on his phone. Then, like he couldn't help himself, he said the name. Mara, Sarah, Dev, a couple others. My heart didn't race. It sank. "You're going on a weekend trip with her." He finally looked up, and his face already had that defensive expression, like he had decided ahead of time that I was going to be unreasonable, so he wouldn't have to consider whether he was being disrespectful. "It's a group trip. Don't make it weird." "I'm not making it weird," I said. "I'm asking a question." He leaned back in his chair, and I answered it. Yes, Mara's going. So are other people. It's not like we're sharing a room. The way he said it, like he'd practiced that line in his head, made my stomach tighten. Are you sharing a room? His jaw clenched. Jesus Christ. He stood up, suddenly loud, suddenly offended. See, this is exactly why I didn't want to tell you. You always do this. Do what? Ask basic questions. Act insecure. Act controlling. He grabbed his phone like it was a shield. I'm going. It's already paid for. If you can't handle me having friends, that's a you problem. I kept my voice level, even though my hands were trembling slightly around the edge of the counter. I've never said you can't have friends, but you've been distant for months. You're constantly texting her. Now you're taking a weekend trip with her. You can see how that looks. How it looks. His laugh was sharp and mean. You know what? I'm tired of walking on eggshells around your feelings. If you can't handle my friends, then leave. The kitchen went quiet, except for the sizzle of vegetables burning in the pan behind me. I turned off the stove and just looked at him. He stood there with his phone in his hand, eyes daring me to argue, daring me to become the villain in the story he was already writing. He wanted me to explode so he could call me crazy. He wanted me to beg so he could feel powerful. He wanted a fight because a fight would mean I still cared enough to chase. And I did care. That was the problem. I cared so much that I had been shrinking myself for months, twisting into a version of me that asked permission to be hurt. But standing there, watching him use that word friends like it was a free pass, something in me finally snapped in a quiet way. Not a scream, not a sob, a crack, like ice splitting on a frozen lake. Enjoy yourself, I said. He blinked, like he didn't understand the language. What? The trip. Enjoy yourself. I repeated it calmly, almost gently. He stared at me, waiting for the second shoe to drop, waiting for me to say more, to plead, to threaten, to negotiate. I didn't. That's it, he asked, his voice uncertain now. What else do you want me to say? He opened his mouth, closed it, then forced a scoff. Fine, I'll enjoy myself then. He walked out of the kitchen, went into the bedroom, and slammed the door. I stood there staring at the ruined dinner, and I realized something that felt both devastating and freeing. He had already decided to live like he was single. He just wanted me to stay and play the role of loyal girlfriend while he auditioned new attention. The rest of the week, Jason acted like nothing had happened. Wednesday morning, he asked me to pass the coffee creamer with a bright voice like we were fine. I handed it to him. Thursday night, he chatted about his day while I nodded along. I could feel him testing the air, waiting to see if I would bring up the trip again. Waiting to see if I would give him a reason to call me insecure one more time. I didn't. Friday morning came. He was up early showering, blow-drying his hair. I heard him humming in the bathroom. Humming. Like this was a vacation he deserved. When he came out, he was wearing cologne. The good kind. The kind he used to wear on our date nights back when date nights existed. He packed his bag on the bed while I pretended to scroll my phone. I watched him toss in clothes he didn't wear around me anymore. A button-down I hadn't seen in months. Swim trunks, shoes that were too nice for a group trip. He zipped the bag and looked at me like he still expected resistance, like he still expected me to stop him at the door. Okay, he said, I'm heading out. I'll be back Sunday night, probably around 8 or 9. Drive safe, I said. He hesitated. His eyes searched my face for anger, for tears, for anything that would reassure him I was still hooked. When I just held his gaze calmly, he frowned slightly, like it made him uncomfortable. Okay, bye. Bye, Jason. The door closed. I listened to his footsteps fade, then the sound of his car starting, then the engine pulling away. And in the silence he left behind, I felt my heart beat steady. Not because I wasn't hurt, because I had finally stopped arguing with reality. I waited 60 seconds, just in case he circled back for something he forgot. Then I stood up, and I got to work. The moment Jason's car pulled out, the apartment didn't just get quieter. It felt like it exhaled. The air stopped bracing for impact. The walls stopped waiting for the next argument. It was just me and Biscuit, and the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the sound of my own breathing returning to a rhythm that belonged to me again. Biscuit padded into the kitchen like he sensed a shift in the weather. He rubbed against my ankle, then looked up at me with that smug little expression he always had, like he was judging my life choices and forgiving me anyway. I reached down and scratched behind his ears, and my fingers shook slightly. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. Because this wasn't a sad movie scene where the girl collapses and cries into a pillow. This was the moment the girl stands up and decides her life is not a debate anymore. I walked into the bedroom and stared at Jason's side of the closet. His shirts hung neatly, like he still belonged here, like this wasn't the same man who had told me to leave if I couldn't handle his friends. If you can't handle my friends, then leave. The sentence replayed in my head like a loop. Not because it hurt, because it clarified. I didn't need more proof. I didn't need a confession. I didn't need to catch him in the act. I had been handed permission to stop trying, and I wasn't going to waste it. I had already done the planning, not in a frantic, impulsive way, in a quiet, measured way that had started weeks ago, back when my stomach first began twisting every time his phone lit up at night. I had researched storage units the way some people research vacations. I had looked at apartment listings during lunch breaks. I had checked my own finances, separated what was mine, documented what I had contributed. I had listened to him call me insecure, and instead of arguing, I had started preparing for the day I would no longer need him to validate my reality. The storage unit was booked, $89 for the month, Porter Street, a gate code, a padlock I'd bought 2 days ago, and hidden in the back of my closet behind a stack of sweaters. I had also signed the lease on a 1-bedroom across town that would be ready for move-in on Monday. First month paid, deposit paid, no cosigner, no begging, just a clean exit waiting with the lights off. I moved fast, but I didn't move sloppy. I started with my clothes. I pulled out the boxes I had flattened and tucked behind the laundry basket weeks ago, the kind of boxes you tell yourself you're saving for, just in case. I taped the bottoms one by one, listening to the rip of tape and the snap of it against cardboard like a countdown. I packed my closet first. My sweaters, my jeans, my work clothes, my shoes. I didn't stop to smell anything or hold anything and mourn. Every time a memory tried to climb up my throat, I swallowed it and kept going. Because if I paused too long, I might start negotiating with myself. And I was done negotiating. Then I moved to the living room. The bookshelf was a mix of both of us, but it was also a lie, because most of what made that space feel like a home had been mine. The books I'd collected over years, the framed photos of my family, the throw blanket my mom bought me when I moved out for the first time. The small things that Jason had gotten used to seeing without ever realizing they were proof I had been building a life here while he was busy auditioning new attention. I took what was mine, piece by piece, my books, my photo frames, my gaming console that I had bought before I even met him, my kitchen tools, the good knives, the pots and pans I brought when we moved in. I left the shared items that were truly shared, not because I felt generous, but because I didn't want a war. I wanted clean. I wanted undeniable. I wanted him to walk into a space and feel the exact shape of what he had lost without being able to point to a single stolen spoon and call me petty. By the time I loaded the first boxes into my car, my arms were already aching, but it was the satisfying kind of ache. The kind that comes from doing something real, something physical, something that proves you're not stuck. I drove to the storage unit and typed in the gate code with hands that looked calm, even though my pulse was loud. The gate lifted slowly, like it was letting me into a new version of my life 1 inch at a time. I stacked the boxes neatly, like I was building a wall. Not against Jason, against the old version of me who would have waited until he came home to beg for reassurance. When I locked the unit, the click of the padlock felt like punctuation, not the end of a relationship. The end of me asking to be treated like I mattered. When I got back to the apartment, Biscuit was sitting on the couch, tail flicking. He looked mildly offended that I had left him behind for an hour. I spoke to him the way you speak to the only being in the room who has never lied to you. "I'm not leaving you," I said. "We're just doing something important." The second trip was bigger. My desk, my office chair, the lamp I had bought because the overhead lighting made me feel like I lived in a hospital. I took the bedroom TV, the one I owned before Jason ever touched the remote. Each item leaving the apartment made the space feel more hollow, not empty, because Jason's things were still there, but stripped, like the apartment had been skinned of my presence. The bookshelf had gaps. The living room looked unfinished. The bedroom looked lopsided, like it couldn't pretend to be a shared space anymore. Around 6, I stood in the doorway and took it in. The apartment looked like the aftermath of a quiet storm. Not destruction, absence. The kind that makes you realize how much one person was carrying without anyone noticing. That was when my phone buzzed. Not Jason, because he was busy enjoying himself. It was a notification from a banking app. The transfer had gone through. I had moved my portion of the shared savings on Wednesday night while he slept, not to punish him, but to protect myself. I had changed my direct deposit Thursday morning. I had also paid my half of next month's rent and utilities directly to the landlord with a note that I would be off the lease effective immediately. I wasn't going to let him paint me as irresponsible. I was going to leave him with no angle except the truth. Biscuit meowed at me from the hallway, loud and demanding, like he was calling me back to the present. I walked over and opened his carrier. He stared at it like it was a betrayal. Then he looked at me like I was the villain. I picked him up anyway, because love sometimes means doing the hard thing when the other one doesn't understand. "I know, buddy," I whispered, "but we're going somewhere better." I packed his food, his litter box, his favorite toy mouse that he carried around like a trophy. Then I did something that might sound small, but mattered. I walked through every room with my phone recording video. The floors, the walls, the counters, the condition of everything. Clean, undamaged, just missing me. Because I didn't trust the version of Jason who would come home panicked and turn into someone who needed a scapegoat. I wasn't going to give him one. Sunday morning, I returned one final time to do the last sweep, not because I had forgotten anything, but because I needed to be sure. I needed the apartment to feel finished. Biscuit was already in the new place across town, set up with his bed and his food bowl, watching me like he still didn't approve, but had accepted the new kingdom. Back at the apartment, I set my keys on the kitchen counter, right where Jason would drop his when he came home, like this place was permanent, like nothing could change. Next to the keys, I placed a single piece of paper. Did what you suggested. That was it. No explanation, no accusations, no paragraph he could twist. Just his own words handed back to him, clean and sharp. I locked the door from inside, then slipped out through the patio the way we always did when Biscuit tried to escape, and I left it unlocked for Jason's return. Not because I was being kind, because I was being done. When I drove away, my hands were steady on the wheel. My chest hurt, but it wasn't breaking. It was releasing. The city lights blurred slightly through my windshield, and I realized I wasn't crying because I didn't miss him. I wasn't crying because I finally stopped begging the person hurting me to admit it. In my new apartment, I set up the basics. Mattress on the floor, a lamp, Biscuit's bowls, a few boxes stacked like promise. The space smelled like fresh paint and possibility. It didn't have our history in it. It didn't have his excuses. It didn't have the version of me who kept shrinking to avoid being called insecure. Around 8:43, my phone buzzed. Jason. His name lit up my screen like a dare. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. Then again. Then the text started coming in, rapid and frantic, like panic could reverse time. "Sydney, where are you? Sydney, why is half the apartment empty? Sydney, did you seriously move out? Sydney, call me." I muted his number. Not out of spite, out of peace. I ordered pizza. I turned on a movie I had been meaning to watch. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without permission. Because somewhere between him leaving for that trip and me setting my keys on the counter, I hadn't just moved out. I had moved on. Sunday night arrived quietly on my end. No dramatic countdown. No pacing by the window. Just me on the floor of my new apartment. Biscuit curled against my leg, like he'd already decided this was home. A half-eaten slice of pizza, cooling on the coffee table I hadn't assembled yet. I remember checking the time out of habit. 8:47. He would be pulling into the parking lot right about then, expecting the same apartment he'd left behind. Expecting me on the couch. Expecting discomfort, maybe tension, but not absence. I didn't have to imagine his reaction for long. My phone lit up at 8:51. Jason calling. I watched it vibrate against the table, the screen flashing his name like it still had authority over my attention. It rang until it stopped. Then it rang again. I let that one go too. By the third call, my phone buzzed instead of rang. The text had started. "Sydney, where are you? Sydney, why is half the apartment empty? Sydney, is this some kind of joke?" I muted the conversation and leaned back against the couch. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel victorious. I felt calm in a way that almost scared me, because this was the calm of someone who had already done the grieving, while the other person was still pretending nothing was wrong. By 9:15, the calls had turned frantic, then angry, then confused again. I didn't read them all. I didn't need to. I already knew the arc. Panic first, because control had slipped. Then outrage, because panic feels better when it has somewhere to go. Then eventually blame, because accountability was never his strong suit. Around 11:34, a different message came through. The tone had changed. "Sydney, I know I messed up. Please come home so we can talk. I'm sorry." Sorry. The word he couldn't find when it mattered. The word that only appeared once the consequences were real and inconvenient. I stared at the message longer than the others, not because I was tempted, but because I was finally seeing him clearly. He wasn't sorry he'd crossed a line. He was sorry the line existed. I put my phone face down and went to sleep. The kind of deep, dreamless sleep that comes after you stop bracing for emotional impact. Monday morning, my phone was heavier with notifications than it had been in years. 23 messages. Not just from Jason, but from people who suddenly felt entitled to an opinion on my life because his version of the story had started circulating. Ben from his team. Hey, Jason called me freaking out. What happened? Kevin, a mutual friend. He says you just disappeared. Are you okay? Another one. Sydney, he's really upset. Maybe you should talk to him. I replied to Ben because he had always been decent to me, even when Jason wasn't. He told me to leave if I couldn't handle his friends. I left. That's it. The response came almost immediately. Wait, he actually said that. Like those exact words. Yes. There was a pause. Then, that's rough. I'm sorry. You okay? I looked around my new apartment, the light coming through the window. Biscuit stretched out like he owned the place. The silence that felt earned instead of empty. Yeah, I'm good. And I meant it in a way that surprised even me. Jason didn't take my silence well. Around noon, my phone buzzed with an unknown number, then another, then a voicemail notification. I didn't listen. I didn't need to hear his voice to know what it would sound like. Apology mixed with accusation. Confusion layered over entitlement. What I didn't expect was him showing up at my workplace. I work at a mid-sized firm downtown, 3rd floor, glass conference rooms, neutral furniture designed to look impressive without being memorable. I was in a meeting when Amy, one of my coworkers, tapped on the door and leaned in. Sydney, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. I excused myself and walked toward the lobby, already knowing. And there he was. Jason stood near the reception desk like he didn't belong there, eyes red, hair uncombed, wearing the same clothes he'd probably slept in. People were glancing over, curious, uncomfortable. He looked smaller without his confidence, like someone who had lost the script and didn't know how to improvise. We need to talk, he said the second he saw me. I kept my voice low. I'm at work. I don't care. You can't just ghost me like this. I didn't ghost you. I left, like you suggested. His face crumpled in a way that might have worked on me once. I didn't mean it like that. I was upset. You know I didn't mean it. Did you not mean the words, I asked, or did you not mean for me to actually do it? He stepped closer, lowering his voice like this was suddenly a secret. Please, Sid, just come back. We can work through this. There's nothing to work through. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. 3 years. We were together 3 years, and you're just done. You were done first, I said calmly. You just wanted me to stay so you wouldn't look like the bad guy. His jaw tightened. What about the apartment? The lease is in both our names. You can't just bail on rent. There it was. Not what about us. Not what about Biscuit. Not even what about the relationship. What about rent? I pulled out my phone and showed him the confirmation email. My half of next month's rent and utilities paid directly to the landlord. A note attached stating I would be off the lease effective immediately. You're covered, I said. I didn't bail on anything. His eyes flicked over the screen, then back to me. You planned this. You gave me the whole weekend. You planned all of this while I was gone. I didn't correct him, because yes, I did. I didn't think you'd actually leave, he said, his voice cracking loud enough that the receptionist glanced over. That's not my problem. He looked like he wanted to argue, to say something that would flip the script back in his favor. But he couldn't find it, because there was nothing left to threaten me with. No fear, no guilt, no obligation. I need to get back to work, I said. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back when I heard him crying. I didn't slow down when I heard someone ask if he was okay. By the time I reached my desk, he was gone. That afternoon, the messages shifted again. Different tone, different strategy. Sydney, nothing happened between me and Mara. Sydney, it was just a group trip. Sydney, you ruined everything over nothing. Sydney, I hope you're happy. The blame phase. Familiar. Predictable. I blocked his number, not out of anger, but because I was done being the villain in a story that only existed to protect his ego. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a message from someone I didn't expect. Sarah L. Hey, I don't know if I should tell you this, but I thought you deserved to know. My chest tightened, not with dread, but with curiosity. Jason and Mara shared a room at the resort. I heard them arguing about it Sunday morning. She was mad he wasn't being clear about what they were. He looked uncomfortable. There it was. Confirmation. Clean, unavoidable. I stared at the message for a long moment, waiting for the pain to hit. It didn't. Instead, I felt something steadier settle in my chest. Relief. Validation. The quiet satisfaction of knowing my instincts had never betrayed me. "Thank you for telling me," I typed. "I appreciate it." She responded almost immediately. "For what it's worth, you seem like a good person. He talked about you sometimes, said you were too stable, too predictable." I almost laughed. Translation: I typed back in my head but didn't send. I didn't play games. I didn't manufacture chaos. I didn't confuse intensity with intimacy. When I put my phone down, I realized something important. I hadn't lost him. I had escaped a future where I would have kept apologizing for noticing the truth. And that realization felt better than any apology he could ever give. By Thursday, the noise around Jason had started to thin, not because he had accepted anything, but because he was running out of people willing to carry the weight of his version of the story. Panic is loud at first. Then it gets repetitive. Then people get tired of listening. I heard updates through Ben, not because I was asking, but because information has a way of leaking when someone is unraveling in public. Jason had tried to stay at a friend's place the night after he showed up at my office. It hadn't gone well. He drank too much. Talked in circles, kept insisting he didn't understand how everything had gone wrong so fast, like the months leading up to that weekend didn't count. Then came the part that almost felt predictable. He tried to move in with Mara, not in a formal way, not with a conversation that included responsibility or clarity, just in the impulsive, messy way people do when they think attraction automatically equals a safety net. According to Ben, Jason showed up at her place, assuming the weekend had changed things, assuming that shared room meant shared future. It didn't. Mara didn't want a relationship. She wanted attention. She wanted excitement. She wanted someone else's boyfriend orbiting her without actually having to deal with the fallout. When Jason realized that, the fantasy collapsed. The thrill that had made him feel bold suddenly made him feel foolish. Ben told me she had turned him down gently at first, then firmly. She wasn't interested in being the solution to his problems. She definitely wasn't interested in being responsible for the wreckage he brought with him. And when that door closed, Jason started scrambling, asking around about roommates, about sublets, about anyone who could help him keep his life from visibly falling apart. Not my problem. That phrase came to me easily now, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Because once you stop volunteering for emotional labor that isn't yours, the world becomes much simpler. That same afternoon, I received an email from an address I recognized immediately. Jason, subject line, please read. I almost deleted it without opening it. But curiosity is a quiet thing. It doesn't demand, it just waits. So I opened it. The message was long, carefully written, structured like a defense instead of an apology. He said the resort messed up the booking. He said he didn't plan to share a room with Mara. He said nothing happened. He said they just talked. He said he understood now that he had pushed me away. He said he missed me. He said he missed coming home. He said he missed Biscuit. He asked if we could just talk. I read it twice, not because I was confused, but because I was looking for something that never appeared. Ownership. Not excuses, not explanations. Ownership. Everything was external. The resort, the misunderstanding, the timing. Even his self-awareness came packaged as accident. I pushed you away. Not I chose to ignore you. I took you for granted. Not I assumed you would stay no matter what I did. I closed the email and didn't reply. 3 weeks passed. Life didn't suddenly become magical. It became quieter, which I learned was better. I set up my apartment slowly, intentionally. I hung art Jason had always called unnecessary. I bought a chair he once said was a waste of money. I organized my kitchen the way I liked it, not the way someone else tolerated. I started going back to the gym, something I had let slide during the last months of our relationship when I was too tired from walking on eggshells to care about anything that wasn't survival. My body responded almost immediately, not with weight loss or dramatic transformation, with energy, with sleep that didn't feel like recovery from a fight. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from without realizing it, not because Jason had forbidden them, but because emotional exhaustion shrinks your world if you let it. Tom from work invited me to a weekly basketball group that met after hours. I said yes without overthinking it. We played badly, we laughed, we grabbed beers afterward and talked about nothing important. It felt easy, it felt normal. It felt like breathing without checking if it annoyed someone. Jason, meanwhile, was spiraling in smaller, sadder ways. According to Kevin, he had moved back in with his parents temporarily. The apartment lease was up in 2 months, and he couldn't afford it alone. Mara had started seeing someone else from the office, which apparently hit him harder than he expected. He filed a complaint with HR about mixed signals that went nowhere once text records showed he had initiated most of their conversations. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt distant, like I was reading about a character from a show I had already stopped watching. One Saturday morning, a month after I left, I ran into Jason at the grocery store. He was standing in the produce section, staring at avocados like they had personally wronged him. I almost turned around, but he had already seen me. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, just two people who used to share a life now sharing an awkward aisle. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He looked different. Not physically exactly, just worn. The kind of tired that comes from realizing you made a mistake you can't undo. "How have you been?" he asked. "Good. You, surviving?" He gave a weak laugh. "Moved back in with my parents. Temporary." "That's good," I said, and meant it in the neutral way you mean it when you don't want someone to suffer, but you also don't want to fix them. We stood there in silence, the hum of the refrigerator cases filling the space where our relationship used to be. "I think about you sometimes," he said quietly. "Wonder if I made a mistake." I looked at him then, really looked at him, at the man I had loved for 3 years, the man who used to steal food off my plate and fall asleep during movies with his arm draped over me. And I also saw the man who had chosen attention over respect, chaos over stability, ego over partnership. "You did make a mistake," I said, "but not the one you think." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Your mistake wasn't me leaving. It was assuming I would stay, no matter how you treated me." His eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Sid, I really am. Can we try again? Start over?" I shook my head. "Why not? People make mistakes. People grow." "Some mistakes aren't about growth," I said. "They're about revealing who someone really is." He didn't argue after that. He just stood there holding an avocado, tears sliding down his face, while I picked up a bag of apples and moved past him. "Take care of yourself," I said. I didn't look back. That was the last time I spoke to Jason. There was no dramatic follow-up. No late-night confession, no sudden breakthrough where he realized everything he had lost and changed overnight. Life didn't wrap it up neatly for his benefit. It just kept moving forward without him at the center of my world. And that, I realized, was the most honest ending we could have had. 6 months passed quietly. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but earned. Biscuit had claimed every sunny spot in my new apartment like a tiny landlord, stretching out across the couch as if he'd always lived there. I had fallen into routines that belonged to me again. Morning coffee without tension, evenings without checking someone else's mood before speaking, weekends that didn't revolve around proving I wasn't too much or too insecure. One Friday evening, I came home from a weekend trip to the mountains with Tom and a few people from the basketball group. We'd hiked, camped, cooked terrible food over a fire, and told stories that didn't matter, but somehow meant everything. It was simple, light, the kind of fun I'd forgotten existed because I'd been so busy managing someone else's emotional weather. I dropped my bag by the door and sat on the couch, tired in a good way. Biscuit hopped up beside me and immediately fell asleep, his paw resting against my leg like punctuation. My phone buzzed. "Ben, hey, thought you should hear it from me before you see it online." "Hear what?" "Jason's engaged." I stared at the message longer than I expected to. Not because it hurt, because I was checking for something. A pang, a twist, jealousy, regret. None of it came. Just a mild curiosity, like hearing about a former coworker you barely remember. I opened social media anyway, scrolled to his profile. There it was, a photo of him and a woman I didn't recognize, her hand angled toward the camera, ring catching the light. The caption read, "When you know, can't wait to marry my best friend." According to the comments, they'd been together 4 months. I closed the app. That was it. No spiral, no sadness, no urge to compare myself to someone new. Just a quiet understanding that his pattern hadn't changed. He didn't process endings. He replaced them. He didn't sit with consequences. He skipped ahead to the part where everything looked fixed. People asked me later if I regretted how I handled things, if I wished I'd fought harder. Tried counseling, given him another chance. Their tone always implied that leaving was the extreme choice, that staying and suffering quietly was somehow more mature. My answer never changed. He told me to leave if I couldn't handle his friends, so I left. Some people thought that was cold. They didn't understand that staying would have been colder. Staying would have meant accepting that my feelings were optional. That respect was conditional. That love required silence. I would rather be alone in a space I filled with things I loved than be partnered in a life where I had to apologize for noticing the truth. I would rather walk away cleanly than stay and slowly disappear. Jason taught me something valuable in the end. He taught me that words have consequences, that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival, and that when someone shows you who they are, especially when they think you won't leave, you should believe them the first time. The weekend he went on that trip, I packed up 3 years of my life. But what I really packed was my self-respect. And when I walked out of that apartment for the last time, I took it with me. Some trips end relationships. Some notes say everything that needs to be said. And some endings, the quiet ones, are the most powerful of all.